Hello and welcome to the Washington Urban Debate League's Junior Varsity Video Series. In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the federalism disadvantage. First, we'll talk about some of the key concepts involved in this argument. Then we'll walk through the different pieces. We'll talk about extending the disadvantage, and then talk about how to answer it as the affirmative. So, what does it mean when I talk about federalism anyway? Well, federalism is a complex question about the balance between state and federal power in government. Some countries have a very centralized system, such as Germany and Mexico, essentially a strong executive branch with a central legislature dominating regional governments. Others have a very decentralized power structure, such as the United Kingdom. Scotland and Wales have their own parliaments that govern local matters and even are considering secession from the United Kingdom. The United States was constructed to be a very decentralized nation. The first version of the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, didn't even include the ability for the federal government to collect taxes. Since its founding, however, states have ceded more and more power to the federal government. Let's talk about federalism when it comes to education. You might remember the chart on the right from the topic overview video. Education, as you can see, is very much a state issue, a bastion of state power, even as other issues have become more and more federalized. The federalism disadvantage argues that the plan is a power grab by the federal government at the expense of states, upsetting the balance of power, which is bad for the country. The role of the state and federal government has gone back and forth over the last few decades. In most policy areas, power is trending towards the central government, but education has remained a bastion of state power. Even in education, however, there has been some back and forth. President Bush's No Child Left Behind Act included several federal mandates, but also devolved a lot of authority to the states. President Obama's first education initiative, Race to the Top, didn't mandate anything, but created a lot of incentives for states to comply with federal suggestions in order to get money. Since states were so desperate for cash, most complied. The most recent piece of large-scale education-related legislation, ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, sends a lot of power back to the states. They are to complete plans to improve their education system and send them to a relatively lax screening process by the Federal Department of Education. Secretary DeVos is a large supporter of a decentralized education reform movement and is governing accordingly. This gives you generic inherency, both structural, that she is the secretary, and attitudinal, because those are her beliefs, that says the trend is towards states' rights now. To win uniqueness, you might need to be more specific than just general trends, focusing on a specific sector of education policy, such as school choice, curricular changes, testing, etc. In this disadvantage, the uniqueness and the link are very closely related. Ask the affirmative questions about how policy is made now, and how the plan changes the issue they are addressing. The link for this disadvantage is pretty simple. Federal policy, especially in education, trends towards local control now. Does the plan change or challenge this trend? The generic link is just federal policy, but to use this argument effectively, you'll need to be more specific than that. Education policy specific to be sure, and if possible, specific to a specific sector of education policy. Federal action on things the federal government doesn't usually get involved with, like curricular changes, incentives for school choice, etc., are definitely challenges to the existing trend to local control. Be specific and reference multiple reasons or actions taken by the plan that change this trend. Also, point out how large and substantial the plan is. This can help you win that the change is substantial enough to have negative implications. The federalism disadvantage is pretty easy for the negative to win uniqueness and link debates. However, the impact debate is the hard part. There are several possible impact scenarios for this disadvantage. First, powerful state governments are needed to prevent Donald Trump from doing anything catastrophic. Second, the balance of U.S. federalism is copied by other countries and a key ingredient to global democracy. Since democracies are rarely at war with one another, democratic peace theory, and they are also seen as more likely to respect individual rights and solve global problems, we definitely want to serve as an effective model. And third, expanding the power of the federal government is an assault on the freedom and individual liberty of the citizens. Embracing majoritarianism, majority rule, is oppressive to minority groups, reducing their representation in government and allowing things like racism to thrive. Turning case is a powerful argument that the negative can make on a disadvantage or critique. The idea is to show how the affirmative actually makes things worse, not better. A detailed explanation is that the negative outcomes of the plan are sufficient to prevent the affirmative from solving the problems it claims to solve, a no solvency argument, and are so bad and or specific that it will actually make the problems the affirmative wants to fix worse, which is offense for the negative. Let me give you an example. If the affirmative wants to solve global warming by building a new technology, the negative could point out that the process required to manufacture this technology will make global warming worse. In the context of federalism, turning case can turn federalism's relatively weak impacts into a very compelling story. Lots of research suggests that one-size-fits-all federal education programs are ineffective or at least inefficient, and that states and local governments can make much more effective policy for students, catering to their specific needs. Therefore, federal policies trying to fix, for example, the achievement gap, or to encourage more students to study STEM, might actually be worse than existing local initiatives. So how do you use the federalism dissent in a debate? Let's start with the first negative constructive. Read and highlight down the 1 and C outline. The whole shell should only take 2 or 3 minutes to read, giving you plenty of opportunity to make other arguments. This disadvantage was designed to be a net benefit to the state's counterplan, so if you read one, I'd encourage you to read the other as well. Choose an impact scenario that you like before the tournament, and include that in the first negative constructive. You can also research new impact scenarios and be creative. One possible option could be a specific international scenario where countries that model the United States could face conflict from independence movements if they don't embrace the right balance of federalism. Prepare 2 NC links to common cases and prepare how to explain the affirmative case and how it links to the disadvantage. This is an area you can do a lot of research to supplement the existing file. In the block, it's always important to give an overview of the disadvantage. Here's an example. Education policy is currently controlled by the states through the Every Student Succeeds Act, but the plan will be a power grab for the federal government. Strong state governments are necessary to prevent President Trump from overreaching his authority and preventing his worst impulses. Answering 2IC arguments line by line about the uniqueness, the link, and the impact. I'd suggest adding more analysis and evidence in the link and impact debate. Make sure to extend the impact and begin impact calculus, discussing time frame, probability, and magnitude. And lastly, be sure to make a turns case argument specific to the affirmative. In the 2NR, if federalism is or is part of the strategy, such as with the state's counterplan, that you are going to win the debate on, go all in. Answer any 1AR arguments on the uniqueness in the link, and extend extra link analysis from the block. Extend your impacts and the turns case arguments, and do impact calculus. Why is the impact of the disadvantage more important than the benefits of the case, and show how this disadvantage could turn case. If using the state's counterplan, explain how the state's counterplan can solve the case, and that the risk of negative implications from federalism outweighs any solvency deficits to the counterplan. These arguments, federalism and state's counterplan, were designed to go together. The state's counterplan says that state governments can do the plan instead of the federal government, solving the case. Federalism is a reason why state action is preferable to federal action. This is the net benefit of the counterplan, the tiebreaker, why the judge should vote negative for the state's counterplan if the plan and the counterplan do the same thing. It also means that if there are reasons why the state's counterplan can't solve quite as well as the federal government, there is still a reason why an imperfect state policy is better than federal overreach. So how do you answer the federalism disadvantage when you are the affirmative? We'll run through the uniqueness, the links, the impacts, and the case turn. First, the federalism disadvantage is based off general trends in federal policy. And there are lots of examples outside education policy about how the federal government is concentrating power at the expense of the states. There are also lots of examples of education policy outside ESSA where the federal government is taking action. Why is the plan going to cause a negative impact instead of any of these other instances, in or outside of education? On the link debate, there are multiple interpretations to many cases and how they will impact the balance of federal and state power relations. Let's talk defense. The plan could be very small or narrow and wouldn't impact the overall balance of federalism. You could also argue that federalism simply isn't relevant to modern governance and there isn't a trade-off. Some offense could be that the plan increases state power, not federal power, and that federal power is good, preventing the states from being racist or removing inefficiencies from the current system. Let's talk about the impact debate. First, the defense. States are doing a fine job of preventing federal or Trump-related negative impacts with or without the plan, since other safeguards exist. Second, states are already acting to combat Trump, so is the impact unique? And third, just because President Trump takes action doesn't mean it's going to be bad. So are the states really needed to stop some of his ideas? On offense, the states could get in the way of good things the president does. When the negative makes a turns case argument, you're going to have to explain your way out of this one. It will likely require arguments about the effectiveness of federal intervention in education policy. This is your solvency, especially addressing the questions of preserving equality, preventing racism and discrimination, ensuring quality, and making sure states act, even if they don't want to. Making time frame and sequencing arguments are also helpful. What happens first and when?